Hello wrestling fans, it's the Pro Wrestle Machine back with another one. By the way, keep those requests, comments, likes, and subscribes coming. All human interaction helps the algorithm. Now, back to 1997. February 3, 1997 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Jerry Graham passes away. Future of NHB in New York in serious jeopardy. Dave Brown quits. NWO gimmick exposed. More. February 3, 1997. Jerry Graham, one of pro wrestling's legendary characters of the 1950s, whose exploits out of the ring overshadowed his accomplishments inside, passed away on January 24 at a convalescent home in Glendale, California at the age of 68. Graham, among pro wrestling top heels of the late 1950s when he and supposed brother Eddie Graham, as the Golden Graham tag teams, headlined and sold out Madison Square Garden many times during the era when Vince McMahon Sr. and Toots Mont's northeastern promotion known as Capital Wrestling Corporation was based around tag teams. He later helped get started a bevy of Graham family members, none of whom were real kin, the most famous of which were Crazy Luke Graham, James Grady Johnson, and superstar Billy Graham, Eldridge Wayne Coleman. Graham suffered an apparent stroke on December 15, one day before his 68th birthday, which had left him in a semi-comatose state since that time at Glendale Memorial Hospital. Friends and hospital workers had tried desperately to find living family members, but efforts to reach his two surviving sons proved fruitless. He returned from the hospital and was brought back to his convalescent home this past Thursday, hooked up to tubes, and passed away the next morning. Even more famous than the 1957 riot in Madison Square Garden, that he was a key part of that nearly shut down a flourishing pro wrestling business in New York State and a ban of children under 14 attending shows in Madison Square Garden that stuck for nearly 20 years, or his 5 United States, predecessor to the current WWF World Tag Team, tag titles reigns with his so-called family members, were his legendary out-of-the-ring exploits, usually in some form or fashion from a lifelong legacy of drunk and disorderly arrests that plagued most of his life after achieving major stardom in pro wrestling. He was known for wild stories told by him, the wildest of which were even true, and for stories told about him, the wildest of which were also true. The Golden Graham's battles against the likes of the Bastion brothers, Roland Red Bastion and Luke Klein, the Fabulous Kangaroos, Al Costello and Roy Heffernan, Mark Lewin and Don Curtis, Don Beetleman, and most notable of all, the top-drawing babyface tag team in the Northeast during that era, Argentina Rocca and Miguel Perez, father of today's Miguel Perez, drew several Madison Square Garden sellouts and probably nearly as many of what would be called today race riots at arenas, particularly in New York City. After Eddie Graham, Ed Gossett, left the team to venture to Florida, where he ended up owning the promotion, Jerry's career disintegrated due to problems largely stemming from weight and alcohol problems. Graham, who weighed in excess of 400 pounds for much of the past 3 decades of his life, was given numerous chances by various promoters who heard the legacy of his heel exploits in the Northeast. It was said Vince McMahon Sr., in particular, had a soft spot for Graham, who he frequently gave one chance after another. In each case, it wouldn't be long before Graham's addiction spelled the end to a very short, unproductive run. As late as 1975, after Graham had trimmed down to 230 pounds, McMahon Sr. brought Graham back, but it lasted something like 1 or 2 unimpressive television tapings, which was his last shot at stardom in the ring. Even in 1985, Vince McMahon Jr. gave Graham a shot to come in as a manager, but it was the same result as all the previous chances, lasting exactly 1 appearance on the TNT television show before disappearing. Graham never had any kind of a significant run with a major promotion after the 60s, but actually wrestled his final match in 1991, at the age of 62, on an independent show in Southern California, where he lived most of the last 16 years, some 48 years after his first pro match in 1943 at the age of 14 in Arizona. Although his real name was Jerry Graham, he had a dual identity of sorts, as at times in Southern California when arrested for his regular drunk and disorderlies, he'd sometimes be arrested under the name of Richard Hertz. He'd tell the police his name was Big Dick Hertz. In many ways he lived a tragic life, gaining much success in his early 30s. But using the bottle to come to grips with the devastation of the death of his parents and later his best friend in wrestling, Antonino Rocca. After falsifying his age to serve in World War II, Graham, who later attended college and was a good student getting A's and B's across the board except in, ironically, nutrition, began a full-time wrestling career as Dr. Jerry Graham, after being trained by the biggest drawing card of the post-Depression era, Jim Londos, and being sent to work in San Francisco for promoter Joe Malsiewicz. In the late 40s, he spent just under 1 year in India and always raved about the likes of Tiger Jodhpur Singh, Doris Singh, and the Ballas as the toughest shooters he ever met. He received a major push in 1952 for promoter Paul Jones out of Atlanta and was one of the top heels in the country for the remainder of the decade. Jerry first hooked up with Eddie Gossett when Gossett was kicked out of the Texas territory for punching a local ringside doctor in around 1956. Gossett, as Eddie Graham, the longtime promoter and booker for Championship Wrestling from Florida Incorporated, went on in the late 60s through the early 80s to become one of the most influential people in the entire pro wrestling industry before his own suicide death. The Golden Grahams captured the tag team title of the territory that would later be known as the Worldwide Wrestling Federation on September 1, 1958, defeating Lewin and Curtis in Washington, D.C. Lewin and Curtis regained the titles 3 months later, with the Graham second reign beginning on May 27, 1959 in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Eddie Graham left the territory, and for a 4-month period Jerry Graham and Johnny Valentine were recognized as champions until Eddie's return in March of 1960. They lost the belts on April 2, 1960 in New Haven, Connecticut to the Bastion brothers, but regained them in the same city in a rematch 2 weeks later. The Bastines regained the titles 1 week later. In one of his many returns to the Northeast, which by this time was known as the WWF, the Golden Grahams, Dr. Jerry and Crazy Luke, won the United States tag titles from Don McClarty and Argentina Apollo in 1964 in Washington, D.C. The title reign was relatively short, losing to Gene Kiniski and Waldo von Erich, but his most famous match of his career was on November 19, 1957 in Madison Square Garden, teaming with Dick the Bruiser in the main event against Rocca and Edward Carpentier. Graham and Rocca both bled heavily, and a riot broke out with the heavily Italian and Puerto Rican audience that backed Rocca and Carpentier, wanting the hide of Bruiser and Graham. That wasn't unusual for Graham, who incited many a riot, particularly among Puerto Rican fans of Rocca and Perez during his heyday, and would tell stories of nights literally hiding in garbage cans outside small arenas as the crowds would gather by the heel dressing room exit and stay for hours waiting for him to leave the arena. But the famous riot resulted in a few police officers being injured, numerous arrests of fans, and Graham and Bruiser basically fighting the fans for their lives. The story gained some national publicity and nearly resulted in pro wrestling being banned from New York City. The end result of a publicized hearing in New York ended with New York State Athletic Commission head Julius Helfand fining both Rocca and Graham $1,000 for starting the riot, and Bruiser and Carpentier were fined $500 apiece. Instead of banning wrestling altogether, the commission ordered that children under 14 would no longer be allowed to attend shows at the Garden, a ban which continued through the mid-70s. Partially as a result of this incident, Bruiser was banned for life from wrestling in New York and never returned. After leaving New York, Graham, known by his friends and in the business simply as the Doc, eventually settled in the Phoenix area where he grew up. Wayne Coleman, who later became his brother Billy Graham, remembered seeing Dr. Jerry's names in the local newspaper fairly often from his drunk and disorderlies during the 60s. Ironically, the two ended up meeting when Coleman was working as a bouncer at a local bar, and Coleman, who had wrestled in the Calgary territory, talked with him and got him to call the Los Angeles office to set up another comeback. It was the beginning of the career of superstar Billy Graham, but only a brief blip in the life of Dr. Jerry, whose out-of-the-ring behavior of constant out-of-the-ring trouble in Los Angeles saw him only last about 5 weeks in the territory. Graham's first and major mental breakdown occurred on the day his mother, Mary Graham, died August 12, 1969 in Phoenix. According to local newspaper reports, Graham called his mother's doctor after she was admitted to the hospital with heart problems, and warned him that she had better recover. When she died at 2 p.m. that day, Graham and his 12-year-old son Jim came to the hospital armed with a hunting knife and a sawed-off shotgun. When a nurse tried to tell him that his mother's body couldn't be moved, he shoved her aside and went to the emergency room and took his mother's body out on a stretcher. When security attempted to stop him, he threw one security guard across the hallway. Graham then put his mother's dead body over his shoulder and dragged a security guard with his other arm and put his mother's body on a stock of wooden pallets. As police tried to calm him down, he held them off with the hunting knife and screamed, "Leave me alone. I just want to bury her." Eventually he drove the knife into a utility pole and the police calmed him down and arrested him. He pounded on the police car doors once he was inside the car. He was arrested second time 6 days later when officers went to his home to serve him. While he didn't resist arrest, when they looked into the briefcase he was carrying with him, he had an ice pick and a loaded gun inside. Graham was institutionalized for a time because of the incidents. During his heyday, Graham had sent a lot of his money, both from pro wrestling and because oil was found at one time on his father's property, to his mother, who he was very close with. After her death, She left $500,000 to the Baptist church, causing Graham an intense hatred of religion and a feeling of being betrayed by the person he loved the most. He lived a meager existence for most of the rest of his life. Graham also suffered an emotional setback after the death of Rocca in the mid-70s, who was his most famous rival in the ring but one of the very few people in the business he truly liked. Graham's last regular appearances on a wrestling television show was as a heel-collar commentator for Bakersfield, California promoter Antone Leone in the early 80s. This was a few years before Jesse Ventura made the genre a standard operating procedure for a pro wrestling television show. Graham didn't last long, as his sarcastic sense of humor, ironically years ahead of its time for pro wrestling, got him booted out when he would make remarks about his frequent nemesis, the Los Angeles Police Department. The remark that ended his last television run was when a wrestler used the sleeper, and Graham said that the LAPD had killed numerous people with that move. Graham moved to Southern California permanently in the early 80s and became a well-known local character to those heavily into the local wrestling scene. Among the prelim wrestlers in the area and the wannabe wrestling in training, he was the local character who was at one time the star they all wished they could be, but also the sad comedic character of all the downsides of the pro wrestling industry, things Graham himself was never shy about talking about. Thanks to Graham's longtime friend and fan Kurt Brown for his help in recreating the life of one of wrestling's most talked about characters. In a reversal of position largely due to media pressure, in particular the New York Times editorial on January 17, the future of NHB fighting in New York State is in serious jeopardy. On January 27, New York State Senate Majority Leader Joseph Bruno and State Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver indicated the new law that goes into effect in a matter of days regulating and thus legalizing NHB events under the State Athletic Commission was under serious reconsideration, largely due to pressure from both the media and then from Governor George Pataki and New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani. Bruno brought up a bill which would give local governments the power to ban the events. According to a New York Times article on January 28, Bruno said the outrage of New York City leaders, Giuliani, City Council Speaker Peter Vallone and State Senator Roy Goodman, persuaded him to restudy the matter. Bruno said he talked with Pataki, who said he would sign an ordinance giving local authorities the power to ban the events, although the governor indicated he would rather the legislature sponsor a bill to ban the events entirely in New York. Pat Lynch, a spokesperson for Silver, said that Speaker was looking for nothing less than an outright ban. He believes that it is a barbaric exercise that can permanently maim individuals who participate and as such, should not be a sporting event in the state. A bill to give localities the power to ban the event or to simply ban it stateside could come up for a vote as early as January 29 because the tide in both houses of the legislature, which passed the bill to legalize and regulate NHB by a landslide margin late last year, has totally turned. Everybody thinks it seems it ought to be banned, Bruno said. Bruno was the lone politician last week who publicly backed the original bill, saying that the statistics on injuries simply don't justify banning the event, pointing out boxing has a higher injury rate and there is no call to ban it. The irony is the same politicians who were the most vocal in passing the original bill are the ones publicly making the most of the latest controversy and trying to get a new bill passed for a statewide ban. Bruno said he favors allowing localities to impose their own rules as opposed to the statewide ban. Both bills were introduced to committee on January 24. Goodman, on October 11, after his bill regulating the sport passed, said, "We heard from public officials and medical professionals, as well as from the fighters themselves, and were able to pinpoint the problems with the sport. My legislation addresses those problems, protecting both the participants and the public. This legislation will put an end to unbridled human cockfighting which can seriously injure contestants and which sets a terrible example to our youth." On January 28, Goodman sent out a press release claiming he is battling lobbying jiu-jitsu experts to outlaw what he called human cockfighting. These fights are no different from street brawls. Contestants use brutal techniques, including kicking, chopping, headbutts and chokeholds. Goodman said the recently passed legislation, which he was the one who authored and got passed, doesn't change its fundamental nature or turn a bloody public spectacle into legitimate sport, basically word for word what the Times editorial that changed the sentiment of the state legislature stated. Especially disturbing is the terrible behavioral example which these contests set for our impressionable youth. No legislation would go into effect in time to threaten the February 7 UFC pay-per-view show from Niagara Falls, which has sold just under 3,000 tickets. However, the Extreme Fighting pay-per-view show scheduled for March 28 in Manhattan will probably be moved to Iowa. From a practical point of view, it's highly unlikely that the event is going to take place in New York City, said EFC promoter Donald Zuckerman. The State Boxing Commission in Iowa has a set of rules for shoot fighting, which are far more stringent than the rules previous EFC events have been governed under. The proposed legislation would also place UFC's tentative date for what it was planning as a major breakthrough show in the Nassau Coliseum on May 30th in grave jeopardy. The date, which was dependent upon the Islanders being eliminated from the playoffs early enough to begin local advertising, would have been the first UFC event in the New York City market. UFC has lost a great deal of popularity in the Northeast in 1996 due to it not being carried by Cablevision Systems, which services much of that portion of the country. My reaction is confusion, said Semaphore Entertainment Group President Bob Merowitz. It seemed to me that New York State had taken a very intelligent step. Now, with absolutely no facts, people are pushing the New York State legislature to make a change in what seemed like a good law, an intelligent law. Jose Torres, a well-known former world light heavyweight champion boxer, noted boxing author, former head of the New York State Athletic Commission, and current EFC commissioner, which is in a figurehead position, wrote a letter back to the Times decrying its editorial. Your call to ban extreme fighting in New York, editorial, January 17th, was unfounded. When I was inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame last week, I had occasion to reflect on the sport that has been a part of my life for over 40 years. I concluded that boxers use every bit of skill, trickery, and determination to win. Interestingly, the champions are usually those men with the best character. This is exactly the case with extreme fighting, the combat sport you inaccurately denounce as one in which fighters pummel each other into pulp until one of them becomes unconscious or surrenders. Last October, I became commissioner of a group that promotes extreme fighting. I accepted this appointment only after assuring myself that the fighters in no way attempted to maim or kill their opponents. The fighters wear protective gear, and the matches are supervised by a referee and overseen by doctors with full, independent discretion to stop a bout. While there have been injuries and deaths as a result of boxing matches, auto racing and high school football have claimed even more lives and serious injuries. Yet your newspaper routinely covers these sports. For you to then call for the ban of a sport that has never caused a death or serious injury because it is too brutal seems spurious. My endorsement of extreme fighting is based on a long history of actual participation in combat sports. Your criticism seems based more on perception than reality. Just because politicians who may never have seen an extreme fighting match want to ban it, that is not a good reason to join the politically popular parade. If censors and politicians succeed in banning these events, their next target may be our religion, our sexual preference, or the books we read. After more than 30 years of being one of the most popular wrestling television announcing institutions ever on a regional basis, Dave Brown abruptly called it quits on January 23 after a blow-up with USWA General Manager Larry Burton. Brown, the longtime sidekick to Lance Russell, was the single longest-running pro wrestling announcer on any single show still active. His career in Memphis television wrestling dated back as far as anyone can remember, to at least 1970. The two were without question, from a general public perspective, the most well-known pairing to host local wrestling television anywhere in the country during the modern era. Brown is even more famous locally for being the most popular television weatherman and perhaps the most famous local news personality in the Memphis market for the past 2 decades. Brown and Russell hosted championship wrestling during its peak in the late 70s and early 80s when it was often the highest-rated show of any kind in the Memphis market. At its peak in the early 80s during the days of the Fabulous Ones, the Saturday morning live television show on Channel 5 in Memphis drew a 23 rating and an incredible Super Bowl-like 70 share, beating out every primetime network show in the market for total viewing audience. It also got high ratings in the markets it was syndicated to on a week delay. Brown starting working with Russell, whose legacy in Memphis wrestling dates to the 50s, on WHBQ Channel 13, where he served as the weatherman on the news. In the late 70s, the television wrestling show moved from Channel 13 to Channel 5 with Russell as host, and a short time later, strings were pulled to lure Brown from Channel 13 to Channel 5 to be both the weatherman and wrestling announcer. Brown became the singular host of the show in 1989 when Russell moved on to WCW. Apparently there was some sort of a remark from Burton, who has heat with just about everyone in the Memphis territory except owner Jerry Lawler, that led to Brown abruptly calling it quits. Several other wrestlers have either quit or threatened to quit or are looking to quit for similar reasons. The feeling was that after investing nearly 30 years of Saturday mornings, the combination of heat with Burton and it just being time to take his Saturday mornings back led to his leaving. Apparently Lawler spoke to Brown after his quitting, under the impression Brown would finish up on the January 25th show, saying not to mention that he was leaving or say goodbye to avoid a maudlin feeling to the show. Brown told Lawler it wouldn't be a problem because he had no intention of doing the show. Lawler and others in USWA attempted to contact Russell about doing the show, but he had prior commitments, so Lawler and Corey Macklin hosted the show. During the show, there was no mention of Brown made whatsoever. Previously, when Brown would miss a week due to vacation, it would always be acknowledged at the beginning of the show that he was on vacation and would be back next week. Russell, who hasn't done the show in months, was contacted about coming back, but there is no word whether he'll do so or not at press time, although it is believed he won't come back full time. You may call it the night that the NWO gimmick was fully exposed. Maybe it'll even go down as a turning point in an ever-changing wrestling war at the very worst. At best, it was one real bad night, lucky if only for the fact that one bad show doesn't change the face of wrestling, and that the majority of the television viewing wrestling fans don't order pay-per-view and thus didn't see it. Problem is, most of the television viewing wrestling fans who actually spend money on pro wrestling, thus basically keep the wrestling economy going, do order pay-per-view events. NWO sold out what came off to outsiders as the brainchild of someone intoxicated by his own success to the point of all perspective being lost, was the single worst pay-per-view show in the history of pro wrestling. There have been shows where the quality of the matches were worse, although this would be a bad show by that criterion. There have been shows with less heat and worse atmosphere, although this would be a bad show by those criteria as well. But there has never been a show with such poor announcing and outside wrestling skits, and combined with the bad wrestling, lack of heat and bad atmosphere made it the night the Baltimore Bash and the Philadelphia Halloween Havoc were no longer thought of as the bottom of the pay-per-view barrel. It was like WCW copied the worst aspects of the first 2 weeks of Shotgun Saturday Night, and then tried to go even farther to the point it looked like a bar show put on by a person whose brain was so fried by acid that only they knew what world they were in, and it had only a semblance of resemblance to the pro wrestling show they were attempting to put together. It was even more amazing coming from a company that was on its biggest roll in its history and is loaded when it comes to talent depth, neither of which were apparent. The only signs of the success of WCW were the sellout at the 5-season center in Cedar Rapids, Iowa of 5,120 paying $68,209 who largely felt as ripped off as those at home did that spent $27.95 on this mess. And it will likely turn out to be a fairly significant buy rate for the show since NWO was the in thing in wrestling. This show, based on crowd reactions, in that an NWO show in a sea of NWO t-shirts saw the NWO wrestlers get booed, or in many cases, ignored in nearly every match sans Scott Hall and Kevin Nash's tag team match. While the name NWO is over, the NWO name can't get anyone over. The NWO's popularity is Hall and Nash. Hogan, trying to play heel and rogue babyface at the same time, is still both a big drawing card based on his past and an obnoxious bore based on his present. The rest of the guys are guys who weren't over, dressed up with the same cool t-shirts as those in the crowd, but still couldn't get over. While Hall and Nash can get away with the teenage lingo or just about anything else in their late 30s because when you're over you can almost do no wrong. Both Eric Bischoff and especially Ted DiBiase come off as pitiful trying to act like teenagers in the parking lot during class breaks while in their 40s. Sweet? Not. The less said about the NWO beauty pageant and the members of the washed-up band Jackal the better. If the Oak Ridge Boys, who are a real big name band, in Nashville, their hometown, didn't sell ticket one or pay-per-view one and ended up as the bathroom break for the live wrestling fans, the idea of trying it again with a worse band just shows that those who don't know anything about the past are doomed to repeat its stupidity. If that wasn't bad enough, the booking was horrible as well. The Nick Patrick gag went from being a heat-seeking missile to a tired, worn-out screw job by the climax of one of the worst world title pay-per-view matches in history. A Mexican death match without any Mexicans, and without an explanation as to why. A wrestler running another over in a motorcycle and the announcers selling it as a comedy spot rather than a heat spot? And that same wrestler, after having been run down, appeared 2 nights later on a live television show not selling an injury, nor did the announcers even acknowledge the incident. A pay-per-view show without even one interview with a wrestler, despite having some of the best interviews in wrestling sitting about 4th rows deep in the audience? Suffice to say that if someone wanted to put on the worst show possible on purpose, they could have put on worse matches, but they'd be hard-pressed to have a worse show. 1. Masahiro Chono pinned Chris Jericho, Chris Irvine, in 11:08 after a Yakuza kick. Bischoff made a remark that they didn't have to give tickets away at a 7-Eleven to get people to come to this pay-per-view. That was in reference to the WWF, which only could get 48,000 paid for its show last week. The match started slow. Jericho did a great plancha and then his knee hit the post and began selling the knee. Fans began chanting USA even though the only American in the ring was Nick Patrick. Chono brought a table from under the ring and set it up. Jericho mounted a comeback doing both a dropkick off the top rope and his lionsault quebrada, but still selling the knee. As Jericho went to the top, Chono kicked him off the top and he fell backwards through the table. As he got back in, Chono hit the Yakuza kick for the pin. 2 stars. The beauty contest started with Eric Bischoff's teenage protege, Jeff Katz, making his television debut in a basically impossible situation. The idea was to spoof beauty contests, but it was so lame the crowd began chanting for Deborah McMichael. 2. Big Bubba Ray Trailer beat Hugh Big Dick Dudley Morris, William DeMott. Isn't McDevitt representing this guy in a Mexican death match? Morris subbed for Conan, who was saved the embarrassment by being told not to come due to a scheduling conflict in Mexico. Rules were the match continued until one man couldn't answer the bell. Morris was wearing a total Dudley's blue jeans and tie-dyed t-shirt gimmick, a gimmick he didn't wear on Nitro 2 nights later. You'd think they'd limit copying other offices to their good gimmicks. They traded using chains on each other, which the announcers tried to sell as comedy spots. Morris finally delivered a hot moonsault, but Patrick wouldn't count to 10. They ended up on the floor and Morris tried a twisting crossbody off steps and crashed onto the floor when Bubba moved. Bubba then ran him down with a motorcycle and Morris was counted out of the ring in 9:03. 1/2 of 1 star. 3. Jeff Jarrett beat Michael Wallstreet, Lawrence Rotunda, in 9:22. Jarrett was introduced as Double J. As if legal affairs aren't busy enough with depositions about ridiculous mistakes. The story of this match was that Deborah McMichael looked worried as Jarrett would sell. Match was boring as neither guy is over, even though Jarrett has been really good in the ring during his WCW stint. The way the company has portrayed him in the booking makes him out to be the ultimate geek. Wallstreet had Jarrett in an abdominal stretch when Deborah made Steve hit him with the briefcase, and McMichael intimidated Patrick into making the 3 count. Dud. 4. Marcus Buff Bagwell pinned Scotty Riggs, Scott on Tall, in 13:51. Riggs is so not over that he's under. Bagwell is a very good worker in his new role, but Riggs is a 0 by himself. Finish saw the debut of the Buff Blockbuster, which is basically coming off the top rope into a neckbreaker drop, which was a really cool finisher. 1 1/4 stars. The beauty contest travesty continued. The latest was Katz mentioning that Vince, the NWO Vince of course, wears a cheap hairpiece and powder blue suits. If Jesse Ventura or Bobby Heenan would have said it on a good show it would be funny, but at this point in the show every joke fell flat. 5. Scott Norton beat Diamond Dallas Page via count out in 9:39. Page was taking puffs from a cigar early in the match. Sting showed up in the balcony, but that was the extent of his involvement in the show. Right in the middle of the match, Bagwell, Bubba, Vince and Wallstreet came out and gave Page an NWO t-shirt. He ripped up the shirt, gave Norton a diamond cutter, punched all the other guys and ran into the crowd. Patrick then announced Norton the winner via count out. 1/2 of 1 star. 6. The Steiners, Robert and Scott Reach Steiner, beat Scott Hall and Kevin Nash to supposedly win the WCW tag titles in 14:43. Better than you'd think. Steiner's offense with the suplexes was real good. Most of the match saw them get heat on Rick, building to Scott's hot tag. It was your basic tag team match. Crowd booed Steiners heavily early on but seemed to cheer them more as the match went on. Finish saw Hall give Scott the outsider edge after a ref bump. Rick then bulldogged Hall off the top rope and Scott covered him. Randy Anderson, who was in the 4th row, ran to the ring and hopped the rail while Rick knocked down Patrick once again and counted the fall and gave the Steiners the belts. 2 1/4 stars. 7. Eddie Guerrero beat 6 Sean Waltman in a ladder match to gain possession of the U.S. title belt in 13:48. This was an excellent match, although one wouldn't have known it since the announcers absolutely killed the match. Bischoff spent more time trying to get over that he knows karate and Scott Hall invented ladder matches than build drama into a damn good match. Actually, most people didn't even recognize this as anything more than an average match when it was a great effort by both. Guerrero did a great plancha off the top rope to the floor. 6 suplexed Guerrero over the top rope to the floor and followed with a tope con hilo. Then they started doing ladder spots. Granted, this didn't hold a candle to the Razor Ramon vs. Shawn Michaels pay-per-view matches, but it was at least the same caliber as their house show ladder matches. Highlight was both men on the next to the last step up the ladder and 6 did basically a standing rider kick and both took big bumps to the mat. Finish saw both at the top of the ladder and each came down holding the belt. Guerrero managed to hit 6 with the belt and he took the bump to the floor while Guerrero climbed down with the belt. 4 stars. Miss NWO finally ended with the sight of Bischoff French kissing an overweight mid-50s woman to no cheers, even fewer laughs and a lot of gagging around the country. By this time the show was about as much fun to watch as 3 hours of somebody masturbating. In fact, I'm not sure that isn't what we were watching. 8. Hulk Hogan, Terry Bollea, and the Giant, Paul White, went to a no decision in 11 minutes. Hogan was accompanied to the ring by Nate Newton, Ray Donaldson and George Teague of the Dallas Cowboys, who seemed not to have a clue what was going on. Hogan tried a few wrestling spots, but they were done in slow-mo, about the speed if you throw punches while underwater. Giant missed an elbow off the top rope, which was impressive for a guy of his size. Bischoff kept saying how Giant outweighed Hogan by 80 to 90 pounds, which may be a legit figure, but the gimmick is Giant weighs more than 450 and God knows Hogan couldn't be more than 260. Hogan for the first time since 1990 actually hit on his foot to the face spot. Finish saw Hogan do the leg drop, but Giant got back up and choke slammed him. Patrick counted to 2 and said Hogan kicked out even though he hadn't. He counted to 2 again with the same gimmick. He counted to 2 again, then injured his shoulder so he couldn't lift his arm for the third count. Giant choke slammed Patrick. At this point the jobber crew, Bagwell, Wall Street, Bubba, Six, Norton and Vince hit the ring and Giant was beating them all up. Notice Hall, Nash and Chono had the sense not to involve themselves in this aspect of the angle. Bischoff ran to the ring and gave Hogan a guitar and he destroyed it over Giant's back. Giant survived a fall off Cobo Arena but couldn't stand up to a gimmicked guitar to the back. Hall and Nash then showed up and Hall pulled down Giant's pants showing everyone his enlarged butt and they spray painted NWO for life on his back. Well, it makes next year's awards easy enough. -1 1/2 star. Results. January 12 Caguas, Puerto Rico, WWC, prelim results unavailable. Ray Gonzalez b. Ron Star DQ, Invader number 1 Kershawn Morley, Chicky Star b. Huracan Castillo Jr. DQ, Carlos Colantur Abdullah the Butcher. January 17 Xochimilco, Promo Azteca, Liguela and Brazo Cibernetico b. Nigma and Jurassico, Andy Barrow and Ultimo Guerrero and Ultimo Rebelde b. Tiburon and Hitano and Mariachi, Zorro and Ninja de Fuego and Super Colobi, Enrique Vera and Zapatista and Shu El Guerrero DQ. Conan and Mascara Sagrada and Tarzan Boy b. Mascara Año 2000 and Universo 2000 and Blue Panther DQ. January 19 Manatee, Puerto Rico, WWC, 637, Convicto 308 b. Pepe Gomez, Ricky Santana b. Skull Von Crush DQ, Ray Gonzalez d. Ron Star, Farmer Sam b. Rico Suave Core, Carlos Colon b. El Nene DQ, Invader number 1 b. Sean Morley DQ, Chicky Star b. Suave. January 20th Naha, Okinawa, New Japan, 3000 sellout, Yutaka Yoshi b. Kazuyuki Fujita, Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Takashi Izukabe Norio Onaga and Tadao Yasuda, Shinjiro Otani and Koji Kanemoto b. Jushin Liger and El Samurai, Kazuo Yamazaki b. Kunyaki Kobayashi, Hiro Saito and Hiroyoshi Tenzan b. Osamu Nishimura and Keiji Muto, 2 of 3 fall Satoshi Kojima and Manabu Nakanishi and Kensuke Sasaki and Junji Hirata and Shinya Hashimoto b. Tatsutoshi Goto and Kengo Kimura and Akira Nagami and Michiyoshi Ohara and Akitoshi Saito. January 21st Lafayette, Louisiana, WWF Superstars tapings, 6075, partial results, Farouk and Crush won Superstars Bowl 4 team elimination over Doug Furness and Phil LaFawn, Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith and Godwins, Ahmed Johnson b. Hunter Hurst Helmsley DQ, Flash Funk and Rocky Maivia b. Jesse James and Savio Vega, Undertaker to Mark Marrow, Sultan b. Goldust Core, Octagon and Hector Garza b. Fuerza Guerrera and Heavy Metal, Vader DDQ Steve Austin, WWF title Shawn Michaels b. Helmsley, Bret Hart and Undertaker and Johnson b. Austin and Mankind and Farouk. January 21st Toyota, All Japan 1600 Tsuyoshi Kikuchi b. Yoshinobu Kanemaru, The Eagle b. Kentaro Shiga, Sabu and Rob Van Dam b. Manukia Mossman and Yoshinari Ogawa, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momono b. Mighty Inoue and Haruka Eigen and Masa Fuchi, Stan Hansen and Takao Mori b. Gary Albright and the Lacrosse, Steve Williams and Johnny Ace and Bobby Duncombe Jr. b. Kenta Kobashi and Masao Inoue and Jun Izumida, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao and Tamon Honda b. Mitsuharu Masawa and Jun Akiyama and Satoru Asako. January 21st Tokyo Korakuen Hall, Battlerts, 2300 sellout, Shoichi Funaki b. Hidaka, Alexander Otsuka Naohiro Hoshikawa, Masato Yakashiji and Grand Naniwa and Great Sasuke and Grand Hamada Dick Togo and Men's Teo and Shiryu and Taka Michinoku, Tiger Masayama Minoru Tanaka, Katsumi Yujuda and Daisuke Ikeda Takeshi Ono and Yuki Ishikawa. January 22nd Tokyo Budokan Hall, rings 11,800 Wataru Sakata Sean Macaulay Grom Zaza Masayuki Naruse, Tsuyoshi Saka Alukain Mikhail, Nikolai Zuev b. Mitsuya Nagai, Hira Maeda b. Maurice Smith, Battle Dimension Tournament 3rd place match, Vitsade Teriel b. Yoshihisa Yamamoto, Battle Dimension Tournament Championship Folk Han B. Kiyoshi Tamura. January 22, Green Bay, Wisconsin, WCW Saturday Night Tapings, 2950. Glacier B. Ace Darling, Jim Duggan B. Disco Inferno, Ultimo Dragon B. JL, High Voltage B. Darling and Devon Storm. Chris Jericho B. Super Colo, David Taylor B. Bobby Eaton, Hugh Morrison Meng and Barbarian B. Arnold Anderson and Steve McMichael DQ. B. Mike Enos DQ, Diamond Dallas Page B. Mark Starr, Scotty Riggs B. Gambler, WCW TV title Steve Regal B. Chavo Guerrero Jr., Public Enemy B. Harlem Heat DQ, Dragon B. Colo, Amazing French Canadians B. High Voltage, Chris Benoit B. Jim Powers, Alex Wright B. Buddy Lee Parker, Eddie Guerrero B. Storm, Kevin Sullivan B. Prince Iaokia, Conan B. Craig Pittman, Heat B. Public Enemy, Masahiro Chono B. Parker, Disco Inferno B. Lex Luger B. La Parka. January 23, Oklahoma City, WWF 4092, Savio Vega B. Bob Holly, Rocky Maivia B. Crush, Flash Funk B. Leif Cassidy, IC title, Hunter Hearst Helmsley B. Jesse James, Texas Death Match, Ahmed Johnson and Undertaker B. Farouk and Mankind, Steve Austin B. Goldust, Phineas Godwin B. Owen Hart, Triangle Match for WWF title Shawn Michaels won over Sid and Bret Hart. January 24, Hershey, Pennsylvania, WWF 3323, Rocky Maivia B. Crush, IC title, Hunter Hearst Helmsley B. Goldust, Godwins B. Owen Hart and Bob Holly, Farouk B. Savio Vega, Sid B. Undertaker Core, Steve Austin B. Ahmed Johnson, Bret Hart B. Vader, WWF title Shawn Michaels B. Mankind. January 24, Tokyo, All Japan, 2400, Yoshinari Ogawa B. Rob Van Dam, The Eagle B. Bobby Duncombe Jr., Tamon Honda and Jun Izumida B. Kentaro Shiga and Takawa Mori, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota B. Mighty Inoue and Haruka Aigen and Masa Fuchi, Stan Hansen B. Sabu, Lacrosse and Gary Albright and Kenta Kowashi B. Steve Williams and Johnny Ace and Manukia Mossman, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi B. Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama and Satoru Asako. January 24, Tokyo Korakuen Hall, IWA, 1500 Tutor the Turtle B. Takeshi Sato, Yuko Kosugi and Chikako Shiratori B. Bloody Phoenix and Sagabi, Onryo B. Akinori Tsukioka, Yumi Fukawa B. Emi Motokawa, Ryuma Go B. Katsumi Hirano Leatherface, Rick Patterson, and Great Kabuki B. Kishin Kawabata and Daiko Kobo Benkei, Broken Glass Window Death Match Kabuki and Keisuke Yamada and Keizo Matsuda B. Kawabata and Shigeo Okamura and Takashi Ishikawa. January 24, Reading, Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania Championship Wrestling, Max Crimson and Mr. Ooh La La B. Troy and Horace Mest, Vinny Biondo and Rockin' Ronnie Kerr, Mike Mayhem and Lucifer Grimm, Dave Patera and Easy Gillespie B. Kid Liberty and Pat Shamrock, Boogie Woogie Brown and Jacques Benet B. Jihad Hussein and Diablos Macabre, Brown and Benet B. Patera and Gillespie, Brown and Benet B. Crimson and Ooh La La, Shamrock B. Patera, Glenn Osborne B. A. Starling DQ, Julio Sanchez B. Freight Train Jones, Cheetah Master B. Mark Mest, Goldust, WWF, B. Lance Diamond DQ. January 24, Queens, New York, Ultimate Championship Wrestling, Mike Norman B. Psycho Bates, Shark Attack Kid B. Kamikaze Kid, Paul Loria B. Jimmy Deranged, Pharaoh and Black Sheep B. Mike Masters and Dave Desire, Guillotine Legrand NC Warpath, Chucky B. Tiger Khan DQ, Pharaoh 1 Battle Royal, Tatanka and Falcon Kopiris NC Tommy Cairo and Jim Neidhart. January 25, New York, Madison Square Garden, WWF 16,634 with 13,480 paid. Godwins B. Owen Hart and Bob Holly, Rocky Maivia B. Salvatore Sincere, Steve Austin B. Goldust, IC title, Hunter Hearst Helmsley B. Jake Roberts, WWF title Shawn Michaels B. Mankind, Farouk and Crush B. Ahmed Johnson and Savio Vega, Sid B. Undertaker Core. January 25, New York, Webster Hall, WWF Shotgun Saturday Night Tapings, Bret Hart B. Mankind DQ 1 1/4 stars, Savio Vega B. Rocky Maivia 1 star, Jake Roberts B. Salvatore Sincere Dud, Crush B. Sid DQ Dud. January 25, Tokyo Korakuen Hall, All Japan, 2100 Sellout, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi B. Yoshinobu Kanemaru, Yoshinari Ogawa B. Satoru Asako, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota B. Mighty Inoue and Haruka Aigen and Masa Fuchi, Bobby Duncombe Jr. and Johnny Ace B. The Eagle and the Lacrosse, All Asian Tag Titles Jun Akiyama and Takawa Mori B. Sabu and Rob Van Dam, Gary Albright and Jun Izumida and Stan Hansen B. Tamon Honda and Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao, Mitsuharu Misawa and Kena Kobashi be Steve Williams, and Manukia Mossman. January 25th Hamamatsu, All Japan Women, Tani Mouth be Yuka Shina, Saya Endo be Yumi Fukawa, Genki Misai and Yoshiko Tamura be Momoe Nakanishi and Nana Takahashi, Tomoko Watanabe and Kumiko Makawa be Kyoko Inoue and Tashio Yamada, Takako Inoue be Ri Tamada. Manami Toyota and Yumiko Hata and Kaoru Ito be Asia Kong and Yumiko Hata and Mima Shimoda. January 25th Knoxville, Tennessee Mountain Wrestling, Night Train be JT Coal Miner, Bounty Hunter be Johnny Rayner, Mongolian Stomper be Dr. Dan and Orderly Chris Powers be Eddie Golden, Bunkhouse Buck be 8-Ball Jones, Dirty White Boy and Dirty White Girl be Buddy and Terry Landell. January 25th Wilmington, East Coast Wrestling Alliance 700 Reckless Youth D Kid Flash, Billy Kidman aka Pete Gruner, Animal and Commando be Cowboy Blaze and Mike Mayhem, Ravishing Ronnie be Warhawk, Ace Darling be Cheetah Master, Inferno Kid be Mr. Ooh La La, Boogie Woogie Brown be Chicago Hitman, Pat Shamrock be El Sensational, Glenn Osborne be Viper DQ Goldust, WWF be Lance Diamond. January 25th Forked River, New Jersey, NWA, Kid USA Armand be Spanish Angel, Musketeer be Dirty Dog, Devin Storm and Chris Condito be Super Medics, Greg Valentine be Armand, Tommy Cairo be Derek Domino, King Kong Bundy be One Man Gang, Armand 1 Battle Royal. January 25th Cloverdale, BC International Championship Wrestling, Tournament for Championship Sumito be Basher, Moondog Moretti be Rockford, Bat News Allen Original be T-Man, Pat Brady be Buddy Wayne, Randy Taylor be Tatsumi, Sumito Ker Thunder Warrior, Taylor be Brady, Moretti DDQ Allen, Taylor be Warrior, Taylor be Timothy Flowers. January 26th Philadelphia Core State Center, WWF, 8319 Godwins be Owen Hart and Bob Holly, Sabio Vega be Rocky Maivia, Crush be Goldust, Texas Deathmatch, Undertaker and Ahmed Johnson be Farouk and Mankind, IC title, Hunter Hurst Helmsley be Jake Roberts, Bader Kerr Steve Austin triangle match for WWF title Shawn Michaels won over Bret Hart and Sid. January 26th Yoshikawa, New Japan, 2000 Sellout, Yutaka Yoshibi Kazuyuki Fujita, El Samurai be Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Tatsutoshi Goto and Michiyoshi Ohara be Black Cat and Osamu Kido, Shinjiro Otani and Koji Kanemoto be Norio Onaga and Jushin Liger, Kengo Kimura and Tatsumi Fujinami be Osamu Nishimura and Manabu Nakanishi, Kazuo Yamazaki and Takashi Iizuka be Tadao Yasuda and Shinya Hashimoto, Riki Chashu and Keiji Muto and Junji Hirata be Kunyaki Kobayashi and Akira Nagami and Goto, Kensuke Sasaki and Satoshi Kojima be Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito. January 26th Tokyo Korakuen Hall, All Japan, 2100 Sellout, The Eagle and the Lacrosse be Sabu and Rob Van Dam, Jun Izumida and Mighty Inoue and Haruka Eigen be Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota, Gary Albright and Tamon Honda be Akira Tao and Yoshinari Ogawa, Steve Williams and Johnny Ace be Stan Hansen and Bobby Duncombe Jr., Toshiaki Kawada and Masa Fuchi be Yoshiaki Fujiwara and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi, Survival War Series Kentaro Shiga and Satoru Asako be Manukia Mossman and Masao Inoue, Kena Kobashi and Masao Inoue be Shiga and Asako, Mitsuharu Misawa and Asako be Kobashi and Masao Inoue, Kobashi and Takao Omori be Misawa and Asako, Misawa and Jun Akiyama be Kobashi and Omori. January 26th Ibaragi, All Japan Women, Mio Wakizawa be Fuji, Yumi Fukawa be Rumi Sekiguchi, Saya Endo and Yuka Shina be Nana Takahashi and Momoe Nakanishi, Kumiko Makawa and Mariko Yoshida be Tanimouth and Genki Misae, Tomoko Watanabe be Yoshiko Tamura, Manami Toyota and Kaoru Ito be Ri Tamada and Yumiko Hata. January 26th Fukuoka, JD, Yuko Kasugi be Sagabi, Bloody Phoenix be Emi Motokawa, Alda Moreno and La Infernal be Yuki Lee and Abe, Linus Asuka be Chikako Shiratori, Bison Kimura and Jaguar Yokota be Esther Moreno and Kuga. January 27th Des Moines, Iowa, WCW Monday Nitro Tapings, 3970, Steiners be Meng and Barbarian, Giant be Roadblock, Jeff Jarrett be Eddie Guerrero DQ, Ultimo Dragon be Billy Pearl, Brian Walsh, Lex Luger be Ron Powers, Arnold Anderson and Steve McMichael be Amazing French Canadians. WCW Tag Titles, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash be Devin Storm and Ace Darling, Kevin Sullivan be Joe Gomez, Dean Malenko be Jerry Flynn, Hugh Morris be Chris Benoit, WCW title The Giant be Hulk Hogan DQ. Special thanks to Jeff Bookants, James Titus, Matt Creamer, Greg John, Dominic Valenti, Michael Lamonsky, Georgianne Macropolis, Dan Paris, Roland Alexander, Manuel Gonzalez, Mark McLean, Neil O'Brien, Steve Dr. Lucha Sims, Eddie Goldman, Jesse Money. Japanese television rundown January 11th, All Japan Women. 1. Etsuko Mita and Toshio Yamada beat Shaparita Asari and Mima Shimoda in 1935 when Mita pinned Shimoda with a Death Valley bomb. Very good match with the dives, the near falls, etc. The only problem to this match was there were too many near falls, and toward the end, the crowd was actually getting numbed by them rather than popping bigger for each successive near fall, as is normally the case. 3¼ stars. 2. Asia Kong pinned Yoshiko Tamura in 2:02 with a spinning backhand punch. She literally nearly killed her with a punch which even in worked setting was scarier than most boxing KO punches. Tamura had to be carried out of the ring and she was totally unconscious and hospitalized. 1¼ stars. 3. Manami Toyota pinned Ri Tamada in 1837. This was a spectacular match. The problem, of course, is that nobody believed Tamada could beat Toyota, but based on just work, moves, execution, etc., it was phenomenal. Tamada did the Toyota dropkick off the top rope to the floor early and lots of Toyota moves. Toward the middle and end, Toyota did just about everything, including one sequence where she did a tope, a springboard plancha and a dropkick off the top rope to the floor in succession. One great move after another with the Japanese Ocean Cyclone suplex finisher. 4¼ stars. 4. Kyoko Inoue and Tomoko Watanabe beat Takako Inoue and Mariko Yoshida in 1712 when Kyoko used the Niagara driver to pin Yoshida. Real good, but not at the level of the previous match. 3½ stars. January 11th, New Japan. 1. Junji Hirata and Osamu Nishimura and Satoshi Kojima and Manabu Nakanishi beat Kazuo Yamazaki and Osamu Kido and Takashi Izukai and Yuji Nagata in 11:21 when Hirata pinned Nagata after a clothesline. There wasn't much heat because the Dome is the worst place in the world to watch wrestling, and it takes the crowd a while to get into the atmosphere of watching the screen, so the first match is traditionally dead. Anyway, the work itself was very good. 3 stars. 2. Jinsei Shinzaki Hakushi pinned Michiyoshi Ohara in 9:17 after a diving headbutt and power bomb. Great Sasuke was in Shinzaki's corner for the match. Just before the finish, Akitoshi Saito tried to interfere but Shinzaki ducked and his spin kick instead hit Ohara. Decent. 1¾ stars. 3. They replayed the Chashu Hashimoto IWGP title match from the January 5th show. January 18th, New Japan. 1. Masa Saito beat Shinya Kojika in 4:25 with a standing heel hold. Kojika, the president of Big Japan Pro Wrestling, came out in a tux. Saito physically looks absolutely incredible for 54 years old. He basically played Monster Powerhouse as he not only handled Kojika, but also continually beat up the 3 Big Japan wrestlers that were at ringside. Kojika's only offense consisted of one comedy spot where he choked Saito with a chain until referee Kotetsu Yamamoto, who's in the same age bracket as Saito and Kojika, attacked Kojika to break the hold and Saito went right to the finish. After the match, Saito destroyed the 3 other guys at ringside. This match was worse than most of Hogan's stuff. -1 star. 2. Kendo Nagasaki pinned Tatsutoshi Goto after a piledriver on a chair. Goto did the single worst wind sprint, more like slow jog, clothesline ever. Nagasaki swung a mean chair which busted up Goto hard way, but the match was awful. I'm surprised how bad Nagasaki has gotten. Dud. 3. Shinjiro Otani beat Yoshihiro Tajiri in 8:30. Tajiri is the one Big Japan wrestler who looked really good. The only negative is this match was kept too short because the wrestling was excellent. Highlights were Tajiri using an Osai moonsault and a rolling cradle using his legs instead of his arms. Otani is the best junior heavyweight worker in the world today. 3½ stars. They also replayed both the Chono Nakamaki and Muda Power Warrior matches from the January 5th television show. Puerto Rico. The January 19th show in Manatí, Puerto Rico drew 637 fans with a plethora of no-shows including Abdullah the Butcher, Miguel Perez, wrestling in EMLL instead, Huracan Castillo Jr., Black Feather and Eric Shelley, who appears to be gone. With Castillo not there, the main event ended up with Chicky Star instead facing manager Rico Suave with Star winning with a camel clutch. Every other match on the show with the exception of the opener ended with an outside interference DQ, draw or count out. The main event announced for January 24th in Moco was Carlos Colon and Miguel Perez, who was in Mexico City again instead, versus Castillo and Nene, while Colon is scheduled to defend the Universal title against Abdullah on January 25th in Cabo Rojo. The two had a double countout on January 12 in Caguas for the title. Gorgeous George III, Rob Kellum returns on that show. EMLL Takamichi Noku, Yoshihiro Tajiri and Seiji Yamakawa from Japan are all headed in. Tajiri worked here in the past, while Yamakawa is with Big Japan Pro Wrestling. The main event on January 24 at Arena Coliseo saw Emilio Charles Jr. work as a babyface teaming with Negro Casas against Silver King and Miguel Perez. It was a pretty good match, winding up with Perez knocking out Charles with a Puerto Rican flagpole and burying him under the Puerto Rican flag for the DQ. In the semifinal, Apollo Dantes and El Satanico and Dr. Wagner Jr. beat Lismark Jr. and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. and Dos Caras. Promo Azteca. Lismark Jr. is scheduled to debut here on January 30, which means that he won't be going on the EMLL Japan Tour. Black Warrior is scheduled for a February 8 start, which is right after getting back from Japan. Lismark Jr. may debut with WCW at the next Disney tapings. Los Villanos debuted as a trio on January 26. The Conan vs. Cien Caras feud was restarted as on January 23 in Toluca at the TV tapings before a sellout 2,500. Cien Caras and Blue Panther and Pirata Morgan beat Conan and La Parca and Mascara Sagrada when Caras pinned Conan to set up a singles match which will be at the January 31 tapings. Other new feuds are Juventud Guerrera vs. Super Electra, Angel Azteca vs. Psicosis. AAA. The first major show of the year will be January 31 at Juan de la Barrera Gym in Mexico City with Diesel and Razor Ramon, WWF version, and Jake Roberts vs. Perro Aguayo and Cibernetico and Pierroth Jr. as the main event. The Mexican trio did an interview together saying they are putting their differences aside to face the Americans. This match is going to be some kind of horrible, as usually in cases like this with an American, they use two Mexicans as his partners to carry the match, and the top Mexicans usually can work a lick. In this case you've got three bad workers who don't know the style against three guys who know the style, but are also not good workers. To add intrigue to the match, they are teasing a Cibernetico face turn. In the main event on January 24 in Nezahualcóyotl, which drew a sellout 3,000, had Aguayo and Connect and Octagon face Fuerza Guerrera and Cibernetico and Pierroth Jr. Cibernetico accidentally clotheslined Guerrera, and the two argued, with Pierroth siding with Guerrera. Both attacked Cibernetico, but by the end of the match, all had grudgingly agreed to work together because of the big match against the Americans coming up. Semi-final on that show saw the Love Machines, Hector Garza and Heavy Metal and Latin Lover, lost to Maniaco, formerly winners, and Jerry Estrada and Fishman when La Parca Jr. interfered, pulling Maniaco out of the way of a heavy moonsault in the third fall, and he hit an air ball and was pinned. There has been a major war of the words in the press with Conan and Pena regarding the United States. Pena came back from San Antonio and said how well his wrestlers got over and how pleased WWF was with him, and said how Vince McMahon hugged Pierroth and told him what a great job he did. Conan naturally ran down how they did. Pena then said how in WCW, they don't give any of Conan's guys a push and only let them wrestle each other. All Japan. The latest tour ended with consecutive sellout Korakuen Hall dates on January 25 and January 26. On the first night, Jun Akiyama and Takao Omori retained their All-Asian Tag Team titles, beating Rob Van Dam and Sabu when Omori pinned Van Dam with a knee drop off the top in 12:26. The main event saw a special reuniting of Mitsuharu Misawa and Kenta Kobashi as a tag team as they defeated Steve Williams and Manukia Mossman. In the Roll Call of Champions in the January 20th issue, another title inadvertently left out was Williams and Johnny Ace's win over Misawa and Jun Akiyama for the double tag team titles, which took place on September 5 at Budokan Hall. The January 26 show was headlined by a survival match. All Japan does these once or twice a year, where they get two 4-man teams and do a series of elimination tag team matches. They start with regular tag matches, and the loser of the fall is eliminated and replaced by a new member of the team. The match continues until only one man is left, so he can't form a tag team, as the idea of handicap matches would be foreign to All Japan. Kentaro Shiga and Satoru Asako and Misawa and Akiyama beat Mossman and Masao Inoue and Omori and Kobashi when Kobashi was the only man left on his team to face Misawa and Akiyama. Also on the show was a guest appearance by Yoshiaki Fujiwara in a tag match teaming with Tsuyoshi Kikuchi to lose to Toshiaki Kawada and Masafuchi when Kawada made Kikuchi submit. In something of a surprise, Sabu and Van Dam lost in the opening match of the show to the Eagle, Jackie Fulton, and the Lacrosse, Jim Steele. Nothing has been officially announced for the next tour, although there has been speculation for the major show on March 1 at Budokan Hall that Fujiwara will face Kawada in a singles match. There have also been newspaper rumors that Yoshihiro Takayama, who was formerly with UWFI, will debut on that show. Actually, that angle has already started as Takayama went to Korakuen Hall to start the angle to meet with Gary Albright, who was formerly the top foreign star in UWFI, about getting him a job with All Japan. Albright supposedly went to Baba. The idea would be that the two would wind up as a tag team. Takayama was easily the worst worker of all the UWFI wrestlers, but he's 6'3" or 6'4", and All Japan tradition, which never dies even when it's hopelessly outdated, is to promote tall wrestlers. Takayama was the tall guy in the Golden Cups trio in UWFI that worked New Japan early this past year and got obliterated by Kimo in a shoot match in August. It's the old concept that promoters like to promote people like themselves. Verne Gagne liked to promote amateur wrestlers and college football stars. Vince McMahon liked to promote bodybuilders. Bill Watts liked to promote big football players. Giant Baba likes to promote tall guys. Speaking of Baba, they had a lot of pub around his 59th birthday party on January 23rd. New Japan. This group ran 2 shows over the past week getting ready for the new tour. On January 20th they ran a special show in Naha, Okinawa, and January 26th was a show promoted by Kensuke Sasaki in Akira Hokuto's childhood home of Yoshikawa. Nothing of real significance on either show, both of which sold out, 3,000 and 2,000 respectively. Tatsumi Fujinami broke his right finger and the doctor said he needs to stay out of action for a few weeks, although that may not be the case since he's promoting his own card on February 8th. The first NWO vs. New Japan main event will be on February 2nd at Korakuen Hall with Masa Chono and Scott Norton and Marcus Bagwell vs. Keiji Muto and Manabu Nakanishi and Satoshi Kojima. Shiro Koshinaka is expected back after knee surgery on February 16th. Antonio Inoki has talked about promoting a junior heavyweight tournament show in Mexico using the top Mexicans plus Jushin Liger, Satoru Sayama, who is now hooked up with Inoki in a business relationship, Great Sasuke, and Ultimo Dragon. Other Japan notes. The major show of the past week was Ring's biggest card of the year, the 1996, I know it's 1997 but that's how they do things here, Battle Dimension Tournament Final on January 22nd at Budokan Hall, which drew 11,800 fans. Fulton captured the championship for the second time. He won the 1994, beating Kiyoshi Tamura in 12:36 with an Achilles tendon submission. In the third-place match and a major surprise, Bitsade Terriel defeated Yoshihisa Yamamoto via TKO in 6:19. The other top draw match saw Akira Maeda defeat Maurice Smith of EFC and kickboxing fame with a neck lock in 5:35. Ring's matches are predominantly worked, although there are occasional shoot matches on the undercard and occasionally even in important matches, although none of the aforementioned 3 were likely to have been shoots. The biggest announcement at the show was Sean McCulley, who has done some NHB tournaments both in the United States, with WCC and in Europe, who lost in the opener to Wataru Sakata, after the match announcing that Kimo will join this promotion in 1997. Pancrace's top matches on February 22nd at Tokyo Bay NK Hall are Masakatsu Funaki vs. Semishult in a non-title match, Yuki Kondo vs. Guy Mesger with the winner getting a shot at Funaki's title in May, and the return of Boss Rutan taking on Asami Shibuya. Next War Tour is February 8th through February 11th, with the main events being tag feuds with Genichiro Tenryu on one side and Koji Kiao on the other. Only title match is February 11th in Toyohashi with Lance Storm and Yuji Yasuhiro defending the international tag team titles against Battle Ranger and Masaaki Mochizuki. Next FMW Tour is February 9th to February 19th. Samba Asako, who was a bleeding punching bag during the first years of this office, will come out of retirement for a match on the first night. February 18th at Korakuen Hall has Gladiator, Mike Awesome, defending both his world titles against Masato Tanaka, and February 19th at Korakuen Hall has the World 6-Man Street Fight title with Hisakatsu Oya and Headhunters defending against Tanaka and Koji Nakagawa and Tetsuhiro Kuroda, and a women's bunkhouse death match. After the angle where she quit the promotion, for whatever the deal is, Lioness Asuka was back with JD on the January 26th show in Fukuoka. Gia Japan will be holding a tournament in mid-February to create a WCW Women's Cruiserweight Champion with Chihiro Nakano, Meiko Satomura, Sugar Sato, who has the potential to become a big star, Meiki Numao, Sonoko Kato, Chikeo Nagashima, Kyoko Ichiki, Maiko Matsumoto, Toshie Uematsu, and coming from the US will be Malia Hasaka. Chigusa Nagio and Akira Hokuto will be forming a tag team on most of the Gia main events. Battlers drew a sellout of 2,300 to Korakuen Hall on January 21st, although the main bout on the show was an 8-man from Michinoku Pro where Masato Yakashiji and Gran Naniwa and Great Sasuke and Gran Hamada beat Taka Michinoku and Shiryu and Men's Teo and Dick Togo in 2040. They ran a rare angle where Naniwa and Shiryu each unmasked the other. Naniwa got a towel to put over his head to cover his face but still pinned Shiryu to win the match. Sasuke announced at the show that he was going to ECW in February to feud with Kion Taiga and Togo Teo Shiryu Trio. IWA restarted on January 24 at Korakuen Hall before 1,500 building around broken glass and bashing in cars with Team IWA, headed by Keizo Matsuda and Keisuke Yamada of the old IWA with Great Kabuki on their side, against Takashi Ishikawa's group with former TPW wrestlers Shigeo Okamura and Kishin Kawabata on his side. They've done angles where each side and bashed up the windows of the other's car, building to a match on February 8 in Yokohama where it'll be car versus car. Hiromichi Fuyuki did a run-in on that show, so he, Geto and Jado will also wind up with this promotion. On March 2nd they are running a card to commemorate the 20th anniversary of Ishikawa's pro debut. USWA Miss Texas quit the promotion this week and many thought it was another Larry Burton deal, but in reality it was because she had the WCW offer. Downtown Bruno is now refereeing wearing a hairpiece. Reggie B. Fine has changed his name from Kareem Olajuwon to King Reginald, wearing a crown. He did an interview saying that in 1974, Jerry Lawler was a guy who would get whipped on television, then he got the crown and became one of the biggest stars in wrestling. He's also wearing Lawler-style Tarzan trunks. A correction when we said the booking was being done by Randy Hales, Bill Dundee, and Brian Christopher. It's actually Hales, Dundee, and Kevin Lawler. Kevin Lawler is working TV as a masked jobber called the Yellow Jacket once again. Flash Flanagan's father did a taped interview on television to sell his son's injury. Wolfie D then did another flip plancha onto a jobber and injured him. Mike Samples has changed his name this week to movie star Mike. There was no card last week in Memphis. Lineup this week on January 30th has Bobby Bolton vs. King Reginald, Samples vs. Tony Williams, Mabel vs. Spellbinder, a 6-man elimination match with the prior 6 wrestlers and the winner of that match getting a shot at Jerry Lawler's title in the main event, plus Wolfie D and Jamie Dundee defend the tag titles against Stephen Dunn and Bill Dundee, and a cage match with Brian Christopher vs. Tracy Smothers. ECW no shows this past week nor any hints of anyone or anything on WWF shows either. Sports South dropped both its ECW and WCW programming this past week due to the switch over from being owned by Turner to being owned by Fox. ECW has upcoming negotiations with the station to get back on TV over the weekend featured the Terry Funk vs. Brian Lee match and the first Rick Rude angle from the last ECW Arena show. Funk vs. Lee was way too long for a match involving Lee, who is every bit as bad a worker as Jim Duggan. Funk was still able to turn it into a dramatic, although still a poorly worked match, particularly dramatic toward the end, and the announcing didn't hurt in that department either. The Rick Rude angle with Gary Wolfe, Pitbull #1, came across great, and the pop for Wolfe attacking Shane Douglas was as big a pop as you'll ever hear. Lance Storm should be debuting shortly. Webster, Massachusetts on February 14th has Raven and Stevie Richards vs. Sandman and Tommy Dreamer, Shane Douglas vs. Pitbull #1 for the TV title, Eliminators with Killer Kowalski in their corner vs. Lee and Chris Candido, and a 6-man tag match from Michinoku Pro. February 15th in Revere, Massachusetts has Douglas and Candido and Lee vs. Pitbulls and Dreamer, Eliminators with Kowalski in their corner against Sabu and Rob Van Dam, Sandman vs. Devon Dudley in a street fight in the same Michinoku 6-man, which is tentatively scheduled as Grand Naniwa and Great Sasuke and Grand Hamada vs. Dick Togo and Men's Teo and Shiryu. Here and there. Steve Nelson's next USWF show will be April 12th at the Amarillo Coliseum, featuring a heavyweight tournament plus several singles matches involving lighter weight wrestlers. With the folding of UWFI, Nelson is looking to get in touch with a shoot group in Japan to send his best wrestlers. Tito Santana and his wife Leah have opened up a beauty salon in New Jersey. Santana is working on getting his teaching credential and is also working as a substitute PE teacher. Besides appearing on the ECW shows in Webster, Massachusetts and Revere, Massachusetts, the 6-man tag match for Michinoku Pro Wrestling will also take place for Century Wrestling Alliance on February 16th in Chelsea, Massachusetts. Faro Entertainment runs New Britain, Connecticut on February 14th with Jimmy Snuka vs. Kevin Sullivan and Tony Atlas vs. Rick Fuller plus Devon Storm and Ace Darling as the Extreme Team. If you mention The Observer, you get $2 off any ticket. Goldust was said to have been a big hit on the East Coast Wrestling Alliance indie show on January 25th in Wilmington, Delaware, drawing 700 fans and doing big gimmick business. Lou Albano worked the show as well. A few plugs about things constantly asked about. The Luthez autobiography is available for $28 from Kit Bauman 2017 Chuli Nene, Tallahassee, Florida 32302. Fighting Sports newsletter which covers NHB, K1 and Pancrase Biweekly is available at P.O. Box 957506, Duluth, Georgia 30135. My opinion is that newsletter is better and does a more intelligent job covering NHP than almost any pro wrestling newsletter does at covering its subject matter. The best source for ECW and Japanese videos and videos from anywhere else including old classic matches is RF Video at P.O. Box 797, Langhorne, Pennsylvania 19047. Another source when it comes to Japanese videos would be in any major city that has a Japanese shopping center such as a Yoahan Plaza, and the video stores generally carry All Japan and New Japan tapes that are up to date. From the January 15th Pittsburgh Post-Gazette police blotter, 2 cars and a house were spray painted with dark paint during the night of January 6th and 7th. A 1986 Chevrolet Camaro was painted on Cherrydale Drive and the letters NWO were spray painted on a 1984 Chevrolet and a house on Rock Hill Road. Empire Wrestling Federation on February 2nd in San Bernardino, California at Boys and Girls Club. All Pro Wrestling on February 15th in Hayward, California at the Pacific Coast Sports Gym. Apparently Tony Halme, Ludwig Borga, will be doing some sort of NHB show next month in Birmingham. Halme is apparently also trying to get back with the WWF. NHB. No changes in the February 7th Niagara Falls pay-per-view show other than Joel Sutton being added into alternate lineup as a heavyweight. David Isaacs of Semaphore Entertainment Group was in Japan last week negotiating to put together a major live show in Japan, which will likely happen in either the summer or fall. Scott Ferrazzo is said to have dropped anywhere between 30 and 50 pounds and is expected to come in at around 300. Semaphore Entertainment Group is going to make a major play at a Tank Abbott vs. Chemo match for the May pay-per-view show, which is tentatively scheduled to have 3 heavyweight superfights headlined by the Severn Coleman winner vs. Don Fry, plus another under 200 tournament. Guy Mesger is slated to be in the tournament. The deal with future Pancrase pay-per-view shows largely depends upon how well Mesger and Yoshiki Takahashi do in the next 2 pay-per-view shows. If both make good showings, then Pancrase will probably be back on pay-per-view with the idea that they'll have established to the UFC fans that Pancrase fighters are top level. If they don't do well, the odds of Pancrase being back on pay-per-view are a lot longer. The current contractual situation involving Ken Shamrock is that his UFC contract in 1996 was for $200,000 minimum with an option for $300,000 in 1997. UFC didn't pick up that option, so the contract has expired and he's a free agent. However, UFC has offered him $250,000 for 1997, which he has yet to accept. Shamrock isn't hot on the idea of a match in May with Marco Huaz, which Semaphore Entertainment Group has interest in putting together, and wants either Dan Severn or Abbott. Abbott has made it clear he has no interest in facing Shamrock or Dan Severn, saying that everything has always been handed to Shamrock on a silver platter and he's never proven anything. If Severn were to beat Coleman, he is said to be amenable to facing Shamrock instead of Fry should UFC choose to make the match in May. However, Fry was promised the first shot by winning Ultimate and missed out on it because of his broken hand. However, because the two are longtime friends and Severn was the one who got Fry into UFC, many in the promotion aren't relishing the idea of a potential Severn versus Fry match, even though both agreed to do it should it be necessary. Universal Vale Tudo Federation has a show on January 30th in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, which will be a tournament involving Kevin Randleman, David Bobish, Mario Neto, Carlos Barreto, Mark Hall and Gary Goodridge, among others. Pat Militic, on the original EFC lineup for March 28th but banged up on the January 17th show in Honolulu, will be ready and is still expected to fight on the pay-per-view. Trey Telligman, who faces Victor Belfort Gracie in the first round at next UFC, has only one pec muscle. The other was torn up years ago in a motorcycle wreck. Semaphore Entertainment Group is now interested in signing Mark Kerr, the heavyweight wrestler who won the tournament on January 19th in Brazil. Kerr has been talked with by EFC and they expect him on the next pay-per-view show, although apparently he hasn't signed the deal. WCW. Nitro on January 27th in Des Moines, Iowa drew 3,970, paying $63,439. The show was flat coming off the pay-per-view show. It opened with Eric Bischoff firing referee Randy Anderson for running into the ring and making the count in the Steiners match. Bischoff said that by accepting a free ticket from WCW to the NWO show, think about the logic of this, although thinking about logic in wrestling is a fruitless exercise, that they said on television the promoter of the show was Elliot Murnick, who they identified in the angle as a WCW promoter, but it was supposed to have been an NWO show, that he was a biased referee taking gratis. They brought up that he had cancer this past year, a true story they got planted in a newspaper this past week to set up their angle, while Bischoff laughed and fired him. Bischoff then ordered the Steiners to give back the belts or be fired, and basically the Steiners came off as total wimps giving back the belts because a wrestling babyface portrayal, as they would have gotten fired for standing up for what they believed in rather than backing down to authority. Steiners then had a god-awful match beating Meng and Barbarian. Giant choke slammed Roadblock in 148. Jeff Jarrett beat Eddie Guerrero by DQ in 434 of a good match when Steve McMichael hit Jarrett with the briefcase on purpose, much to the chagrin of Deborah. Ultimo Dragon pinned Billy Pearl, Northeast indie wrestler Brian Walsh, in a good squash. Lex Luger racked St. Louis indie wrestler Ron Powers in 113. Even in that short period of time, Powers looked good. McMichael and Arnold Anderson beat French Canadians when McMichael hit Jacques Rougeau with the briefcase. In a dig at ECW, Ace Darling and Devon Storm came out as the Extreme Team and were annihilated in 158 in a tag title match against Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. During Hogan interview, Sting and Savage were together watching the action from the stands. Hugh Morris without the Dudley outfit pinned Chris Benoit in 307 when Miss Texas, who wasn't given a name yet, showed up to shock and distract Nancy, and Kevin Sullivan then hit Benoit with a chair to set up the moonsault leading to the pin. The gimmick is that Sullivan and Miss Texas were lovers in the past and she's trying to get back with him now that he and Nancy have split. Miss Texas' first interview was really bad. I believe it's going to wind up at the Cow Palace with Miss Texas handcuffed to Nancy while Sullivan has yet another Falls Count Anywhere match with Benoit. They announced that Roddy Piper was given a title shot for Super Brawl at the Cow Palace, but that they didn't know if he'd accept it or not. WCW wanted Piper on the show, but since everything is done at the last second, Piper had other commitments. Piper is supposed to be at the February 3rd Nitro in Memphis. Main event was another Hogan Giant title match. These matches are getting progressively worse, and that's hard to do. This went 2:55 before Hall and Nash interfered for the DQ. This time as they were beating up Giant, Luger made the save for him as the show went off the air. For January 27th, Nitro scored a 3.6 rating and 5.4 share, 2.8 first hour, 4.4 seconds hour, to Raw's 2.2 rating and 3.1 share. The Nitro replay did a 1.4 rating and 3.3 share. For January 20th, which was the Hot Chicago vs. Hot Beaumont live hour, saw Nitro do a 3.7 rating and 5.5 share, 3.0 first hour, 4.4 seconds hour, to Raw's 2.2 rating and 3.2 share. Nitro replay did a 1.7 rating and 4.2 share. We don't have quarter-hour breakdowns for January 27th, but on January 20th, the Bret Hart Quitting Open vs. Randy Savage Sit-In Open saw WCW open with a 3.2 to 2.1 edge. The gap stayed large throughout the hour until WWF closed it somewhat, with Austin vs. Undertaker going head-up with Malenko vs. Dragon and WCW holding a 3.0 to 2.5 lead. WCW's second hour went through the roof, peaking with straight 4.6 ratings for the period where Bischoff took over, and they had Chono vs. Taylor, Hall vs. Booker T, and Luger vs. Stevie Ray. The Clash on January 21st drew a 3.5 rating and 5.3 share, 2,486,000 homes, which is a solid rating, but way down from last year's Clash that did a 4.5, and that also came a day after a live Nitro. Last year was the return of Elizabeth and the Road Warriors and had the star power of Flair and Giant vs. Hogan and Savage on top. The show started at 3.0 for Malenko Dragon, which was a strong start, and built slowly to a 3.9 for Benoit Sullivan. However, the Steiners vs. Canadians fell to a 3.5, so there wasn't much interest in Scott's return, more because it wasn't hyped well, but Luger vs. Hall picked up to a 4.2. Ratings for January 18th saw Main Event at 1.3 and Saturday Night at 2.5. For January 25th, Main Event did 1.3 and Saturday Night 2.6. Pro was preempted both weeks. Kevin Green was on ESPN talking about the Super Bowl and brought up WCW and the NWO angle and talked about wanting to get back into WCW for matches during the off-season. Green acted as if it was real and didn't treat it as if it was a joke, even though the hosts tried to. WCW has plans to run a major pay-per-view out of Charlotte in May with Green and Ric Flair as a tag team. The War deal in New York won't start until September rather than starting this month. Savage's new contract was for a limited number of dates and for $1 million per year. Apparently the deal was completed about the time the Savage Slim Jim commercials started appearing once again. WCW is justifying the deal because they were going to lose the Slim Jim sponsorship without Savage, and that brings in about $500,000 per year by itself. We had heard talk that Kevin Nash and Scott Hall were both given raises. Their original deal was $780,000 per year, but Nash did a newspaper interview in Detroit and he claimed he was making $900,000. WCW will be raising the price of NWO t-shirts since they're such a hot-selling item. WCW had huge first-day advances for Super Brawl in San Francisco, 3,842 tickets and $76,020, and for the March 3rd Nitro in Atlanta at the Omni, 3,704 tickets and $63,837. The stories about fans camping out the night before in San Francisco weren't made up, and that has never happened before even when WWF was at its hottest, nor has there ever been a first-day sale like that in the history of SF or Atlanta wrestling. WCW will run a Nitro in August at the Palace in Auburn Hills, Michigan, and also later this year do a Nitro from the Fleet Center in Boston. WCW Saturday Night for 2 weeks was taped on January 22nd in Green Bay, Wisconsin before 2,950 paying $40,000. The first show aired on January 25th, which saw Ace Darling and Devon Storm debut, this time as the Extremists, later changed to the Extreme Team, losing to High Voltage, thus making them jobbers to the Jobbers. Chris Jericho beat Super Calo, David Taylor beat Bobby Eaton. The match with Arnold Anderson and Steve McMichael and Chris Benoit versus Hugh Morris and Mang and Barbarian ended up with Benoit no-showing and the Horsemen down 3-on-2 when Jeff Jarrett did a run-in to save the Horsemen. However, the Horsemen walked out on Jarrett, leaving him to take a 3-on-1 beating. They continued the idea that Steve McMichael and Arnold Anderson don't like Jarrett, but Deborah does. Steve Regal beat Chavo Guerrero Jr. in a TV title match, and Public Enemy beat Harlem Heat via DQ in a match where Johnny Grunge put Sherry through a table. On the show that airs February 1st, Ultimo Dragon beat Calo, Heat beat Public Enemy, and Lex Luger racked La Parka. Parka was said to have done all kinds of hot moves that Luger didn't sell. When WCW was in Green Bay, they had a press deal at the Packers Hall of Fame where a photo of Luger in a 1982 Packers uniform was put on display. Luger was in Packers camp during several preseasons but never actually was on the active roster for a regular season game. Upcoming major WCW events: March 3rd Nitro in Atlanta at the Omni, March 4th Saturday Night taping in Rome, Georgia, March 10th Nitro in Birmingham, March 16th pay-per-view in Charleston, South Carolina, March 17th Nitro in Savannah, Georgia, March 18th Saturday Night taping in Dalton, Georgia, March 22nd House Show in Minneapolis at Target Center, March 24th Nitro in Duluth, Minnesota, March 27th House Show in Baltimore, Maryland, March 31st Nitro in Roanoke, Virginia, April 6th pay-per-view in Tupelo, Mississippi, April 7th Nitro in Huntsville, Alabama, April 11th House Show in Montreal at Molson Center, April 14th Nitro in Philadelphia at the Spectrum, April 21st Nitro in Saginaw, Michigan, and April 28th Nitro in Norfolk at the Scope. The Philadelphia Nitro is one day after the ECW pay-per-view, so that's a potential disaster waiting to happen. Jacques Rougeau and WCW will be holding a press conference on February 4th in Montreal to announce the April 11th Montreal show. The top two matches on the card will be Hulk Hogan vs. Rougeau for the title and Pierre-Carl Ouellet vs. The Giant, plus other potential matches are Ric Flair vs. Lex Luger, Harlem Heat vs. Faces of Fear, and Eddie Guerrero vs. Dean Malenko, and the card will be rounded out by local wrestlers that worked for Jacques' old promotion. The reason Jacques Sr. may have announced at the Rumble is that WWF may have gotten wind of that and wanted Jacques Sr. publicly shown as being on their side, although in Montreal it is no secret which side Jacques Sr. is on. There are rumblings that Jack Tunney may be involved in helping promote this show, although that hasn't been confirmed. The press conference on February 4th is not a timing coincidence, coming 2 days after the WWF show at the Molson Center. WWF. Don't be surprised to see either major or minor changes in regard to Monday Night Raw. The rating on January 20th, where WWF came the day after a major pay-per-view show where it changed the world title and had a controversial Rumble finish, and opened a hot Raw show with Bret Hart quitting, and Nitro still won the hour handily and scored a tremendous second-hour rating, were major causes of concern for both WWF and USA Network. At press time, no changes were official, but what is being talked about by both sides didn't include switching Raw to a new date, but was more along with lines of going live as frequently as the schedule permits and increasing the show to 2 hours so that the first hour of Raw on USA doesn't end up providing the second hour of Nitro on TNT, its rival network, with a tremendous lead-in. The cost of doing a show of that type would run into six figures weekly, so it's an interesting question how the bill would be split between USA and Titan Sports. When WCW went live weekly with Nitro, both USA and WWF officials publicly talked about how much money Turner was wasting doing that, but it turned out to be the difference in TNT beating out USA last year as the top network in prime time, which is big-time bragging rights that USA will do almost anything to reverse. WWF announced a Raw taping on February 24th at the Manhattan Center, which would be a live show coming just 1 week after the live show on February 17th from Nashville. The WWF word is that the Manhattan Center show was just an experiment at this point. The buy rate for Royal Rumble has been the source of some controversy. WWF is claiming in 0.8 buy rate, which they are saying is a 20% drop from last year, although last year they had claimed a 1.2. Others have pegged it at 0.6, which is far more sizable decline. Every 0.1 is about $325,000 difference in pure profit for the company, so even a 20% decline represents $650,000 less in show income as compared with the previous year. There was some unhappiness regarding the story in this month's Spin magazine from the WWF camp regarding the line that Vince McMahon having barely escaped conviction in a 1994 federal drug trafficking trial. Titan requested a retraction. Superstars tapings on January 21st in Lafayette, Louisiana before 6,075 paying $62,304. Highlights saw them to the Superstars Bowl, a Four Corners tag match with Farouk and Crush beating Doug Furnas and Phil LaFon in the finals. The other teams were the Godwins and Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith. Ahmed Johnson beat Hunter Hearst Helmsley via DQ when Curtis the Butler, Mr. Hughes, interfered. Goldust attacked Helmsley after the match, but Johnson accidentally knocked down Goldust. Flash Funk and Rocky Maivia beat Jesse James and Savio Vega, with Vega doing the heel bit as he turned on January 25th in Madison Square Garden. Undertaker and Mark Mero went to a double countout in a match which ended with Undertaker choke slamming Sable. Sable is going to return with a new, more aggressive personality. Sultan beat Goldust by countout when Helmsley went to kidnap Marlena and Goldust was counted out chasing him. Octagon and Hector Garza beat Fuerza Guerrera and Heavy Metal. Vader DDQ Steve Austin in a match where Bret Hart and Undertaker both ended up involved. In the dark matches, Michaels beat Helmsley to keep the title and Bret and Undertaker and Johnson beat Farouk and Mankind and Austin. The press conference on January 27th in Toronto did introduce Tiger Jeet Singh Sr. and Tiger Jeet Singh Jr. Tiger Jr. will wrestle under the name Tiger Ali and be given a major push. There was some talk in Canada about Glenn Kulka, a member of the Saskatchewan Rough Riders, who did an angle at a TV taping a few years back being in Bret Hart's corner for a match with Sid, being introduced at the press conference. This didn't materialize, although the WWF is negotiating with Kulka to become a pro wrestler. It appears the phone-in, fax, email format of the Livewire show has been dropped. Although it conceptually could have worked, the problems with the quality of the callers made for an often lame show, and it underwent more faceless when it came to hosts than Zsa Zsa Gabor. The show was taped rather than live the past 2 weeks, which appears to be the current plan, so it's basically going to be exactly what the old Mania show was, which is wraparounds largely around matches and angles from the previous week's Raw. With them having to do a live shotgun show every Saturday night, they were killing the production staff having to do live Saturday morning, live Saturday night and live again Sunday morning, production of Superstars. Shotgun was moved back 1 hour in the New York market from 11 p.m. to midnight. Although the public claim this week was it was due to satellite problems, the real reason was the Long Island station was a bit squeamish about the language used by Terry Funk on the San Antonio show and wanted it moved to midnight. The show on January 25th from Webster Hall didn't have much in the way of comedy, so it was a wrestling show. But the matches were said to have been all bad. Bret Hart beat Mankind via DQ when Owen interfered. Savio Vega turning heel again on Rocky Maivia. Jake Roberts squashing Salvatore Sincere and Crush over Sid via DQ when Sid used a chair. And the general response was it was a poor show. Matches announced for the February 13th Thursday Raw special are Michaels vs. Sid for the title and Bret Hart vs. Vader. So far announced for the February 16th pay-per-view from Chattanooga are the 4-man elimination match for the title shot at Mania, Helmsley vs. Johnson for IC title and Owen Hart and Bulldog vs. Furnas and LaFon for the tag titles. I'd expect at least the tag title to change hands since Bulldog is building to a babyface turn and the idea is to push Bulldog as a single into the Bret Shawn Austin Undertaker top level. The crew continues to be somewhat decimated by the flu. Vader is suffering from bronchial pneumonia and missed a few matches, but came to work for the major weekend shows, although by the time they got to Philadelphia on January 26th, his match with Steve Austin had to be limited to 90 seconds because he was having trouble catching his breath. Bulldog went home after the television tapings from a bad flu with a bad fever, and was replaced by the returning Bob Holly. Michaels is still run down from the flu. Sid returned on January 22nd in Dallas after missing television due to a family emergency. Goldust has been cheered in some cities, but was booed heavily in Oklahoma City against Steve Austin. He was cheered coming out against Austin in Madison Square Garden, but once the match started the crowd was totally for Austin and Goldust got no reaction. There is talk of doing a future shotgun show at Penn Station. Doug Furness was a teammate of Reggie White's on the University of Tennessee football team way back when. Raw on February 3rd will air the Royal Rumble match and have clips of the January 31st Toronto Sky Dome show. As of January 28th, the advance was 19,440 tickets sold for $292,254. The largest US or Canada crowd for a non-pay-per-view event since the Hogan-Orndorff 1986 match in Toronto would have been a Hogan-Andre match in Milwaukee in 1988 that drew something like 25,000. Arena business for the past week saw January 22nd in Dallas draw 4,554 and $68,378. January 23rd in Oklahoma City drew 4,092 and $53,778. $1,319 and $159,839. The latter figure is really impressive for Super Bowl Sunday, although it was a matinee show that ended hours before the game. Smith and Mark Merrow missed all the shows after television while Vader missed Dallas and Oklahoma City. Merrow was replaced by Jesse James in Dallas and Oklahoma City and by Jake Roberts the rest of the weekend, all of whom put over Helmsley in IC title matches. In several cities they did Texas death matches with Undertaker and Johnson over Mankind and Farouk, which saw Mankind pin Undertaker in the first fall, but Undertaker used the tombstone to beat Mankind in the second fall and he couldn't answer the bell after that. In Dallas and OKC they did the first triangle matches with Bret, Sid and Michaels leading up to Toronto. They did the 5 minutes periods where Bret and Sid drew, then Bret and Shawn drew. As Shawn wrestled Sid, Sid collided with Bret and Shawn pins Sid after a superkick. Bret then wrestles Shawn and gets him in the sharpshooter when Sid interferes after a ref bump and knocks him off, and Shawn uses the superkick for the pin to keep the title. In Madison Square Garden, they opened the show announcing Bulldog not being there because of his illness and mentioned the death of Jerry Graham and had a moment of silence for him. Godwins beat Owen Hart and Bob Holly. Hart and Holly continually argued during the match. Maivia beat Sincere. Austin pinned Goldust. Helmsley pinned Roberts after interference from Curtis. Michaels pinned Mankind with a superkick. Michaels wasn't booed at all this time. Bret beat Vader via DQ when Austin interfered. Farouk and Crush beat Vega and Johnson when Vega turned on Johnson, and the main event saw Sid beat Undertaker via countout when Vader interfered, fighting Undertaker to the back in a really slow, dull main event. Next MSG is March 16th with Michaels vs. Sid in a cage match for the title, Bret vs. Austin no DQ, Undertaker vs. Vader in a casket match, and Johnson vs. Vega. I expect that show will sell out or come awfully close. Sonny is the most downloaded celebrity on America Online, having surpassed Terry Hatcher and Elle Macpherson. Besides Raw, ratings for the weekend of January 18th to 19 saw Blast Off at 0.5, Livewire at 1.1 and Superstars at 1.4. For January 25th to 26, Blast Off did a record 0.7, Livewire at 0.9 and Superstars at 1.5. The readers' pages. Jerry Graham. Dr. Jerry Graham definitely earned his infamous rep as a hellraiser during his wild drinking parties. But I think a lot of people, myself included, who told many people about his bull in a china shop rampages and countless fights with police tend to forget the important portions of those nights. The liquor brought out more than his wild side. It brought out his vulnerability. The grown child in him who never recovered from the torment of losing his parents and close friends. Antonino Rocca was Jerry's dearest friend in the biz. Rocca's death devastated him. I remember several late-night drives home from Bakersfield when he drank his share. He merrily told us tales about his glory days, let out his piercing war cries, and puffed his cigars, but there usually were a few moments when he grew very sad, very teary-eyed, and would turn to the person nearest him and mutter like a hurt child, "First my father died, then my mother died." He would shake his head, as if trying to make sense of the harsh realities of the world. I've heard two very exaggerated claims that people made about Graham's fall from fame and glory. Many said that the fall was his fault. Others glamorized his eventual poverty as a sort of self-motivated Jack Kerouac type of existence. Both claims are pure bullshit. Graham had a genius for the wrestling business, but he suffered from alcoholism. Unfortunately, wrestling was the only career he mastered in. It's probably one of the worst careers to master if alcohol is the addiction. He tried numerous times to kick the bottle, but either he grabbed onto it again, or wrestlers who wanted to see the doc drunk coaxed him back into it. Don't get me wrong. Jerry loved to party, so often he drank for the sake of partying. The drinking, however, numbed the numerous emotional pains that were too much for him to handle. I'm thankful I got the opportunity to know Dr. Jerry Graham. Nobody described both the splendor and the ironies of the pro wrestling business like he did. No matter how long he was away from active wrestling, Doc could climb into a ring and teach us numerous holds, heat conducting hill tactics, proper posturing and high spots as if he had never spent a day away from the spotlight. If Jerry made a $100 payoff wrestling, he would make sure it was spent that evening for beer and dinner for his friends who drove him to the matches. His shortcomings gave him endless troubles, but his generosity earned him lifelong friends. I love you, Doc, and will miss you very much. Kurt Brown. Brea, California. Comparing wrestlers. Quantifying a wrestler's performance over the course of a year might be a hallmark improvement to the observer. Weighing the many facets involved in a wrestler's performance, drawing power, technical ability, maneuver ingenuity, politics, etc. will be a tough job. Andy Bayer, a racing handicapper, developed a speed index 5 to 10 years ago to quantify a horse's performance specific to the conditions at that track and with the thoroughbreds that competed that day. Critics spouted he had a few screws loose, not understanding the measuring stick that he was developing. The Meltzer quotient would help evaluating Hall of Fame candidates and comparing and contrasting the stars of yesterday and today. As a regular at the ECW, your analysis of the shows is fair and objective. The atmosphere at the ECW arena probably impacts the regular evaluations because the arena is a fun place to watch a show. The contentious relationship between the wrestlers and the fans might be a fire ECW leadership should fight before it becomes an inferno. The heart of the problem is the fans underestimating the toll that the style takes on both the minds and the bodies of the performers. The wrestlers also need to develop thicker skin to not let the semi-smart hecklers get to them. Kevin Donlin. Pasadena, Maryland. Michaels versus Hart. Who's better, Shawn Michaels or Bret Hart? That one is easy. When you compare the two, there is only one possible answer. Michaels is a level above Hart. Whereas Hart needs a good opponent to have a good match, Michaels is clearly in the Funk League. He could have a great match with a broom and make you buy a ticket to see the rematch. Look at their matches against common opponents. Hart's matches with Razor Ramon were forgettable at best. Michaels' matches with Ramon are in the history books. Hart's matches with Diesel were cures for insomnia. The Michaels-Diesel WrestleMania match was great, and this year's In Your House match was incredible. Look at Sid. Michaels had a match with him that I thought nobody could have. Bret certainly didn't. When was the last time Sid had been in an entertaining singles match? Had he ever? This isn't to take anything away from Hart, merely to point he has to have someone with some talent in the ring with him. In 1995 he had great matches with Hakushi and Jean-Pierre Lafitte, but he doesn't have the ability to carry a subpar worker to a stellar performance. I'd hazard a guess that a full-scale pay-per-view main event with Michaels versus Austin would be off the charts. Austin is simply awesome. The better the opponent, the better Hart's performance, but he doesn't have the quality that Flair and Funk have and that Michaels definitely has. So what is Hart's problem with Michaels? He can't stand someone else in the WWF being compared with him. When Ric Flair was in the WWF, he had the same problem. Now the problem is Michaels. Can you see the pattern? Hart has a lot of gall to complain about Michaels. Hart used to complain about Hogan, but when Hart was asked to drop the strap to someone with talent, he complained publicly and privately. Michaels handled the situation with Sid with far more class than Hart ever would have, even though Michaels is hot-tempered and has an ego, but he'll cut someone with that much talent a little slack. Bret Hart is undeniably a great wrestler, perhaps among the best ever, but Michaels is the premier American performer of this era. Dan Cirquitella. Reno, Nevada. I'm quite pleased with the prospect that Bret Hart will regain the WWF title at WrestleMania. In my opinion, he deserves it because he was the man who led the WWF out of a very dark period. For someone to say it was Shawn Michaels who is responsible for the smaller wrestlers being on top is ludicrous. Bret Hart became champion at a time when Rodney Anoa'i was champion. Hart revitalized the house show business, admittedly with help from a strong heel like Michaels and a good gimmick like Undertaker. You can say Michaels helped many people's careers, but it was Hart who made Michaels with the great battles they had in the early 90s. Hart also had great matches with Davey Boy Smith and Curt Hennig that are some of the most underrated battles of the decade. His interviews are superb. He is believable doing introspective interviews, as well as heat-building mic work. As far as Michaels goes, he is an outstanding worker but needs to get over the fact that some people are going to boo him. His Chippendale routine is sickening. God forbid his music isn't cued right or he'll flip out in front of everyone. I went to see the recent house show in Providence. Michaels versus Austin was a 4 stars match and the finish was good. Michaels didn't dance, but he spent 15 minutes letting 14-year-olds paw at him. Then he showed up at the start of the Sid versus Mankind match and sucked up to the fans who cheered Sid by wishing him well. I know he was trying to get over the Rumble match, but it came off like he was trying too hard to win a popularity contest. I admit that having to carry Sid is a burden, but taking it out on the fans shows he was always a better performer as a heel. Hart may have pouted a bit after dropping the title, but he didn't during the match, and he had every right to be ticked off at the time. It was Hart who carried the WWF up to that point, and had it not been for him, those crying teeny boppers wouldn't have cared about Michaels in the first place. Brian Moran, Tiverton, Rhode Island. ECW. Some observations on the Revere, Massachusetts incident. You're absolutely correct. The crowd reaction was almost as appalling as the incident itself. The chance of this is not a work, and the fans who were high-fiving and backslapping New Jack made me sick, as did New Jack's comments. I was about 5 feet away from the railing when he left the ring. What I saw was repulsive. With a wild-eyed grin, New Jack kept saying, "He gonna die." I was also shocked at the main event, and I believe one other match after that match had blood. Granted, a dog collar match usually guarantees blood, but wouldn't it have been wise to play it safe at that point? ECW returned to Revere on January 4th. There was no blood except for Sandman from a wicked chair shot, but I don't think he bladed. The out-of-the-ring brawling was toned down. Personally, I enjoyed the show, but as I was leaving I heard people complaining because of the lack of blood. Joe Fiore, Nahant, Massachusetts. Boy, you're going to get a lot of heat for saying the idea that I was witnessing child abuse and a form of pornography and not professional wrestling took over, with regard to the Eric Kulas tragedy. Look at the angry response Bret Hart got from the ECW hardcores when he likened ECW wrestling to pornography on the Chet Kopic interview on March 19, 1996. Bret had the foresight to see that by catering and encouraging the "we want blood" mentality of his audience, Heyman's product would get progressively more violent as his audience became progressively desensitized. To argue that only the Kulas incident was pornographic while ignoring the vehicle that created it is a matter of degree. After pushing ECW in the Observer every week and then barely touching on the Kulas incident, I was very disappointed and enraged by what seemed like your own insensitivity, both to Kulas and to the perverted product ECW has evolved into. I was concerned by your lack of response to this deplorable incident being taken by readers as you condoning it and therefore further promoting the ECW product to your readers. I was relieved when you said that your initial report was an embarrassment to the Observer. I applaud you for what you wrote about this incident and for alerting your readership that this shouldn't be just another ignored warning sign. Eric Kulas was just a kid who wanted to break into the wrestling business. He didn't have heat with any of the boys. No one even knew who he was. What was New Jack's motivation for being so brutal with this kid? Are Paul Heyman's boys even more desensitized than his audience? In a letter in the January 6th issue, someone wondered why people have turned so viciously on Shawn Michaels despite the fact that, in the writer's opinion, Michaels is the greatest worker of this lifetime. No one is disputing Michaels is an exceptional talent. I think his heat comes from the fact he's a guy with great potential who is acting like a jerk. He struts around with an attitude like he's too good for everybody. He doesn't even talk to the most of the guys. It's like the second coming of Warrior-itis, only in this case it's worse because Michaels is a great worker and nobody wants to see him self-destruct. Marcy Engelstein, New Rochelle, New York. Regarding your January 6th piece about the ECW incident in Revere, Massachusetts, I was at the show and feel it is important to say that many people there knew something happened with Eric Kulas, but because of such poor sightlines, may not have known how badly he was actually hurt. I couldn't have been more than 10 rows back, and although I could see he was cut during the match, it wasn't until I saw ECW's medical worker take her blood-soaked jacket off that I realized how much blood he had lost. This may be a case where one gets a better view watching the event on videotape at home rather than being there in person. I agree that quite a few people in the crowd were hostile to the situation. Not to defend them, but at one point while Revere EMTs were working on him, Kulas raised his middle finger to the crowd, leading some of us to believe he was playing up the injury worse than it really was to egg the crowd on. That being said, by the time they finally got him out of there, every fan in the building, smart or not, should have recognized that something bad had happened. I'm sure the professional EMTs who showed up couldn't believe the crowd reaction. I recall some of the crowd even taunting the EMTs, which was really uncalled for. Hats off to Tommy Dreamer, who came out to help Kulas and attempted to quell the crowd, though his efforts with the crowd didn't pay off. I also agree that Kulas took quite a beating before the blading took place. You mentioned the toaster shot, but he also took a really rough-looking body slam from Mustafa and was hit hard on the head by numerous gangsta objects. Though the Revere incident has become an obstacle when it comes to ECW getting on pay-per-view, in the long run, I don't think it really matters. I tend to think any ECW pay-per-view show will be a money loser even under the best of circumstances. Scott Wallace, Billerica, Massachusetts. I'm in Club ECW and the fan violence issue was blown way out of proportion. Sure, there have been a number of incidents, but isn't that a predictable scenario to any establishment that sells alcohol on the premises? I vividly remember a Dodgers game where fans pelted the field with baseballs. You didn't see them lose their television exposure, did you? God forbid ECW should find an audience who can appreciate it for the crazed, wild-eyed wrestling alternative that it is. Gene Temesi. Piscataway, New Jersey. WCW. I'm getting tired of wrestling promoters treating their fans like idiots. The Robin Hood/Nitro scam was typical wrestling promoters' bait and switch tactics and flagrant lies. The WWF and WCW, along with many other promotions, are guilty of this. The wrestling industry isn't very well respected to begin with, and even with the recent surge in business, they don't have that big of a following that is willing to spend money on their product. Rather than putting out a better product and giving consumers what they want, wrestling promoters prefer to concentrate on the latest scams that, if they work, only do so on a temporary basis. I've written a letter about this subject to Vince McMahon, only to have him hand it to the director of the WWF Travel Club, who turned around and left a message with me about it saying that she's willing to listen to my concerns but doesn't know what she can do because I'm not a member of their travel club. As they continue with their arrogant lack of business sense, more and more wrestling fans are going to, like I have, discontinue ordering their monthly greatest wrestling events of all time. Dan Sella. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This is the end of this conversion. Be sure to comment and subscribe. See you next time, wrestling fans.